Part 1. The Sea Devil. The close night of the Argentine midsummer came down on the sea. Stars pricked out in a sky that was a deep violet. The schooner Jellyfish lay quietly at anchor, with not a splash round her, not a creak on board. Ship and ocean seemed in deep slumber. Half-naked pearl divers sprawled on the deck. Worn out by the day's work under a parching sun, they tossed and groaned and cried out in their nightmarish sleep. Their limbs would jerk and twitch. Perhaps they were fighting off sharks, their deadly enemies. The hot windless weather of which they were having a spell made people so tired that they couldn't even hoist the boats on board at the end of a day's work. Not that it seemed necessary. Nothing indicated a change in weather. So the boats were left afloat, made fast to the anchor chain. Nobody had thought of tightening the shrouds or sheeting home the jib, which fluttered faintly at each stray whiff of wind. From bowsprit to taffrail the schooner was strewn with heaps of pearl shells, pieces of coral, lengths of diving cord, canvas sacks for putting shells in and empty barrels. Against the mizzen mast stood a big water barrel with an iron mug on a chain. The deck immediately round was stained dark with spilt water. Every now and then a diver struggled up and staggered along, sleep-drunk, to the water bar rail. Never opening his eyes, he swallowed a mugful and dropped down anywhere on his way back, as if it were not water he had drunk but neat spirit. The divers were always thirsty. They went without morning meals, for underwater pressure made diving on a full stomach dangerous, so they worked without eating all through the day, till it grew too dark underwater. They had their meal before turning in, and that was of salt meat. The Indian Baltasar, right hand of the schooner's owner Pedro Zarita, had the night watch. In his time Baltasar had been known far and wide as an excellent pearl diver. He could stay underwater for as much as a minute and a half or even 2 minutes, which was about twice as long as an average diver. How did we do it? They knew how to train in my day and started early, Baltasar would say to the young divers. Just turned 10 I was. My father took me to Jose, who owned a tender, for training. There were 12 of us, all kids like me. And this is the way he trained us. He'd throw a white pebble or shell into the water and order one of us to go and get it. And each time he found deeper and deeper places. If one of us had nothing to show for his diving, José'd give him a lash or two of his whip and shove him overboard to try again. And it worked. Then he started to train us to keep longer times underwater. An experienced diver'd go down and make a basket or piece of netting fast to the anchor chain. Then down we went to untie the knots. And we weren't allowed to come up before all the knots were undone. If we did, we got the whip again. The amount of beating we took. Not every body could stick it out. But it made a diver out of me, and the best in the district. And earned me a pretty penny too. Then the time had come when Baltasar had to give up the hazardous trade of a pearl diver. He was no longer young, and his left leg bore the terrible scars of a shark's teeth and his side the marks of an anchor chain. He bought a small shop in Buenos Aires and started a trade in pearls, corals, shells and sea curios. But shore life bored him, and once in a way he decided he needed a break and put out to sea with pearl divers. He was always sure of a welcome, for what he didn't know about the Rio de la Plata and its pearling grounds was just not worth knowing. He was welcomed by all. He knew how to please divers and owners alike. The young divers taught the tricks of the trade, how to hold their breath underwater and to fight off sharks, and when in an especially expansive mood, how to keep an extra fine pearl out of the boss's sight. The owners he helped to sort out pearls and evaluate the best. Baltasar was sitting on an upturned barrel, a thick cigar between his fingers, his face picked out of the darkness by the light of a lantern fixed to the mast. It was an elongated face with a finely cut nose and large handsome eyes, the face of an Araucanian. He was drowsing, but even when his eyes were asleep, his ears were not. They registered sounds and gave him warning in the deepest of sleep. There was nothing but the divers sighing and murmuring to hear. The smell of rotting pearl oysters waft. Ted from offshore. It was part of the job. The shell of a dead mollusk opens more easily. What would have been an overpowering stench for an eunuch-customed nose was near perfume for Baltasar's. For him, a sea tramp that he was, it meant all the pleasures and dangers of life at sea. After the last pearl was extracted, the largest shells were brought on board the Jellyfish. Zarita wasn't one to let anything go to waste. He sold the shells to a factory where they made buttons and studs out of them. Baltasar was asleep. The cigar had slipped from between his fingers. His chin rested on his chest. A sound from far out at sea broke in on his sleep. Then it came nearer. Baltasar opened his eyes. What seemed to him the blast of a horn sounded again, followed by the cheerful ring of a young voice, repeated after an interval in a higher pitch. The blast of the horn bore no resemblance to the harsh blare of a ship's siren, nor the cheerful voice to the cries of a man fallen overboard. In fact, it didn't sound like anything Baltasar could think of. He rose. His sleep seemed blown away by a breeze. He went up to the rail and peered into darkness. His eye and ear detected nothing. Baltasar prodded with his foot a sleeping Indian into wakefulness. "I heard a cry. That must be him," he told the diver softly. "T can't hear a thing," the Gorona Indian, now up on his knees and listening, said softly. Suddenly the horn and voice pierced the heavy silence again. The Gorona shrank from a whip-lash. "Yes, that's him," he said through his clattering teeth. Other divers were waking up. They crawled towards the blotch of lantern light as though seeking in the yellowish beam protection from dreadful darkness. There they squatted, huddling together and straining their ears. The horn and voice came from far off again and was heard no more. "That's him, the sea devil," the divers were whispering. "We ought to be clearing out of here. A shark's a kitten compared to him. Let's speak to the boss." There was a patter of bare feet. Yawning and scratching a hairy chest, Pedro Zarita came on deck. A pair of canvas trousers was all he had on. A revolver holster dangled from a broad leather belt. Zarita approached the divers. The lantern light revealed a swarthy face, crumpled with sleep, curls of thick hair escaping onto the forehead, black eyebrows, a pointed mustache and graying goatee. "What's up?" His self-assured voice and deliberate movements calmed the divers. They spoke all at once. Baltasar raised a hand to silence them. "We've heard he's the sea devil," he said when order was temporarily restored. "You dreamt it," Pedro said sleepily. "We didn't. We all heard his horn," shouted the divers. Again Baltasar waved them to silence. "I heard the horn myself. That was him all right. There's nobody at sea can blow a horn like that. We ought to be getting away from here, and lose no time about it." "Old wives' tales," said Pedro Zarita. He didn't like the idea of sailing from the pearling ground with all those oysters on board, stinking and still not ready for opening. But it was like running his head against a stone wall, trying to talk the divers into staying. They shouted discordantly, flung their arms about and threatened to abandon the schooner and walk to Buenos Aires if Zarita didn't weigh anchor. "Curse you and the sea devil," he said finally. "You win. We'll weigh anchor at dawn." And grumbling and cursing he went below. He was no longer sleepy. Lighting the lamp, he got a cigar going and began pacing up and down his small cabin. His thoughts turned to the mysterious creature that had been haunting their part of the estuary for some time now, striking terror into the fishermen and seaside villagers. Sailors and fishermen would tell tales about it, with many a timid glance over the shoulder, as if afraid that the monster might surprise them even as they spoke about it. The creature was believed to have helped some people and harmed others. "It's the sea god," said the older Indians, "him as comes out of the ocean once in 1,000 years, to restore justice on earth." The Catholic priests exhorted their superstitious Spanish flock to seek salvation in religion, saying that the sea monster was a visitation of the wrath of God for their neglect of the Holy Catholic Church. Rumors spread and at last reached Buenos Aires. For weeks the sea devil made headlines in the sensation-hungry press. Any unaccounted for loss of schooner or fish, in craft, any theft of nets or fish catch were all the sea devil's doing. But there were other stories as well of big fish mysteriously deposited in fishing boats, of men saved from drowning. At least one of these swore that when he was going under for the last time somebody caught him from behind and sped him shorewards and onto the beach, disappearing behind the surf the very moment he struggled to his feet and looked back. Nobody had seen the sea devil, or rather nobody was credited with having seen it. Though, of course, there were some who called heaven to witness that the creature had a head adorned with horns and a goat's beard, the legs of a lion and the tail of a fish, or described it as an enormous toad with legs shaped like a man's. At first the authorities paid no attention to all these rumors and newspaper articles, hoping for the sensation to fizzle out as newspaper sensations do. But rumors led to apprehension and apprehension to alarm, especially among the fishermen. They were afraid to put out to sea. Catches declined. Buenos Aires was experiencing a shortage of fish. The authorities decided it was time to intervene. A force of Coast Guard cutters and police launches was mustered and given orders to detain a person of unknown identity that is causing alarm and panic among the seaside population. For a fortnight the task force combed the Rio de la Plata and the coast with nothing to their credit but several Indians detained for spreading rumors likely to cause alarm and panic. The chief of the police issued an official announcement to the effect that the devil only existed in the rumors spread by some ignorant people, already detained and about to receive the punishment they deserved, and admonished the fishermen to scorn the rumors spread and resume their useful trade. This helped for a time, but not for long. Soon the devil was up to new pranks. Some fishermen were wakened in the dead of night by the bleating of a kid that nothing short of magic could have put into their boat, lying as she was a goodish way offshore. Other fishermen hauled in their nets to find them slashed to pieces. Overjoyed by the reappearance of the devil, the newspapers now clamored for the opinion of science. Nor had they to wait for long. Scientists claimed that a sea monster capable of intelligent acts could not exist in that part of the ocean unknown to science. They went on to say that this did not necessarily apply to greater ocean depths, though even there they would not expect to find such a monster. They tended to agree with the off-the-record opinion of the chief of the police who thought that some practical joker was at the bottom of it all. But not all scientists shared that opinion. Some referred in their arguments to Conrad Hessner, world-famous naturalist, who left us descriptions of the sea maiden, sea devil, sea monk and sea bishop. When all is said and done, many of the things propounded by ancient and medieval scientists have been borne out in our times, for all modern science's endeavors to ridicule them out of existence. Divine creation is truly inexhaustible, and we scientists, more than anybody else, are called upon to practice modesty and caution in our conclusions, they wrote. These last apparently believed more in religion than in science, and their lectures were more like homilies. Finally, a scientific expedition was equipped and dispatched to settle the scholarly wrangle. The members of the expedition found no devil, but they learned a great deal about the unknown person's doings. The older members insisted that the word person be changed for the word creature. The newspapers carried the expedition's report, which said, 1. In several places on the beaches we examined we found narrow footprints of a distinct human shape. Though leading from and back to the sea, they might have been made by people from boats. 2. The nets we examined had cuts of the type produced by sharp instruments. They might have been caught on sharp underwater crags or twisted metalwork of wrecks. 3. A report, brought to our attention, of a dolphin that had been carried by a storm ashore, well clear of the water, and dragged back into the sea by someone who had left behind what looked like clawed footprints, has been carefully looked into. We are fully satisfied that the dolphin in question had been restored to its element by some kind-hearted fisherman. Nor would this have been the only instance of kindness on the part of fishermen towards dolphins. It is common knowledge that dolphins in pursuit of fish sometimes help the fishermen in that they drive fish to the shallows inshore. The alleged claws of the footprints could have been the work of the witness's imagination. 4. The kid might have been brought by boat and slipped on board by some practical joker. The scientists had a lot more to say in their attempts to explain away the devil's doings. They were convinced that no sea creature could have performed them. But the scientists' explanations did not satisfy everybody. They seemed insufficient even for some of the scientists. How could a practical joker, however resourceful and clever, keep dark his identity for so long? Yet what made the whole thing really baffling was that according to the expedition's findings, incidentally not included in their report, the devil sometimes performed several tricks of his at short intervals in places situated very widely apart. Either the devil could travel at an unheard of speed, or there were several of them at work. And that made the practical joker idea altogether too thick to believe. That was what went through Zarida's mind as he paced up and down his cabin. Dawn had come unnoticed, and with it a pink beam of light, stealing through the porthole. Pedro put out the lamp and started washing. As he poured the tepid water over his head, he heard cries of alarm coming from deck. Half washed, he hurried up the companion ladder. Pressing to the rail on the seaward side of the schooner, the divers in loin cloths were gesticulating amid a tumult of voices. Pedro looked down. There were no boats where they had been the previous night. Apparently they had gone adrift somehow in the night offshore breeze. Now the morning breeze was slowly bringing them shorewards. Their oars were afloat, scattered all over the bay. Zarita ordered the divers to collect the boats. Nobody budged. Zarita repeated his order. "Why don't you go and try your own luck with the devil?" somebody said. Zarita placed a hand on his holster. The divers fell back against the mast, glowering at Zarita. A showdown seemed inevitable. Then Baltasar stepped into the breach. "There isn't a thing will scare an Araucanian," he said. "A shark didn't fancy my old bones, neither will the sea devil." Lifting his arms, he took a dive and swam towards the boats. The divers pressed to the rail again, watching Baltasar's progress with alarm. Handicapped though he was by age and with an injured leg, he swam like a fish. A few powerful strokes brought the Indian alongside a boat. Picking up a floating oar, he climbed into the boat. "The painter's cut with a knife," he shouted. "Clean work couldn't have been done better with a razor." Seeing Baltasar safe and sound, some of the divers followed suit. Riding a dolphin. Though only just risen, the sun was scorchingly hot. There was not a cloud in the sky, not a ripple on the sea. The jellyfish was a dozen miles or so south of Buenos Aires when, following Baltasar's advice, anchor was dropped in a small bay near a shore that rose in two rocky ledges straight from the water. The boats scattered all over the bay. Each was manned by two divers, who did the diving and the hauling in turns. The diver in the boat closest inshore seized a big piece of coral that was tied to the diving cord between his legs and made swiftly for the seabed. The water was warm and so transparent that you could count the pebbles on the seabed. Closer inshore, corals rose up like so many bushes of a petrified submarine garden. Small silver-bodied fish flashed in and out among the bushes. The diver crouched on the seabed, quickly picking shells and putting them into the small bag hooked to his leather belt. His tender, a Garona Indian, his head and shoulders bent over the gunwale for a better view of the diver, held to his end of the diving cord. Suddenly he saw the diver leap up, snatch at the cord and give it a sharp tug that nearly pulled the Garona overboard. The boat rocked. The Indian hurried hand over hand with the cord. Presently he was helping the heavily breathing man into the boat. His pupils were dilated, his dusky face ashen. Was it a shark? But the diver had not recovered sufficient wind to answer. What could have scared him so badly? The Garona bent low to the water surface for a better look. Something was definitely wrong down there. The small fry-like birds spotting a falcon were speeding to the safety of submarine forest thickets. Then he saw what looked like a cloud of purplish smoke billow into view from behind a submarine rock. As the cloud grew bigger, the water turned a pinkish tint. Then a dark shape half appeared from behind the rock, made a slow turn and slid back. That was a shark, and the purplish cloud blood spilled on the seabed. What could have happened down there? The Garona looked at his mate. But he couldn't provide the answer. Lying on his back, he was snatching air with wide-open mouth, staring with unseeing eyes into the skies. There was nothing for it but to take him straight to the jellyfish. All the divers that were on board clustered round the man. "Speak up, man," said a young Indian, shaking the diver. "Afraid your funky soul will part company with your body if you open your mouth, eh?" The diver shook his head, slowly recovering. "I saw the sea devil," he said in a hollow, faltering voice. "The sea devil? Come on then, for Christ's sake, tell us about him," the divers shouted impatiently. I looked up and saw a shark, making straight for me, a big black brute with its huge jaws ready to snap. It sure seemed I'd had it. Then I saw him. "The devil? What does he look like? Has he got a head?" "A head? Think he has. Eyes as big as saucers." "If he has eyes, he must have a head," was the young Indian's verdict. "Eyes don't come all by themselves." "Any legs?" "He's got front legs like a frog's. Long green fingers, webbed and with claws. And he's all ablaze like a fish with scales. He makes for the shark, flashes with a front leg. Swish, there's a fountain of blood." "What do his hind legs look like?" A diver interrupted him. "Hind legs?" He tried to remember. "There are no hind legs. Just a big tail ending in two snakes." "Who gave you the worst scare, him or the shark?" "The monster," came the unhesitating answer. "For all it saved my life." "The sea devil," said an Indian. "The sea god that helps the poor," an old Indian corrected him. By this time the news had reached the farthest boats and more divers were coming on board, eager for the story. The man was made to repeat his story over and over again. As he did so, he recalled more details. It now appeared that the monster breathed fire and wriggled its ears, had saber-like teeth, large fins and a tail like a rudder. White-trousered and sombreroed Pedro Zurita shuffled back and forth in the background, his bare feet thrust into a pair of sandals, taking note of what was being said. The more the diver recovered the use of his tongue, the more Pedro became convinced that it was all a shark-scared diver's imagination. And yet it can't be only that, he thought. Somebody did slit that shark's side open with all that pinkish water in the bay. The Indian's lying, but there's obviously more to it than meets the eyes. Rum business, damn it, he thought. At that moment Zurita's train of thought was cut short by the blow of a horn coming from the direction of the reefs. It had the effect of a thunderbolt. Tongues were paralyzed. Faces turned ashen gray. Horror-stricken eyes stared in the direction of the reefs. Near the reefs a family of dolphins were frisking in the water. One of the dolphins gave a loud snort as if in response to the horn summons, made for the reefs and was soon lost to sight behind them. After a few tense moments it reappeared. Riding it was the oddest creature, in fact, the very sea devil just described by the diver. The monster had the body and head of a man, with a pair of immense eyes that blazed in the sun like a car's headlights, silvery blue skin and dark green forelegs, long-fingered and webbed. The creature's legs were immersed in the water, so there was no telling whether they were of man or of beast. In one of its forelegs the creature had a long winding shell. Giving another blow on it, the creature laughed a gay manly laugh and suddenly shouted, "Full speed ahead," leading, in perfect Spanish, patted the dolphin's glossy back with its frog's hand and spurred its mount with its legs. And like a well-broken horse the dolphin put on speed. A cry of surprise escaped the divers. The creature looked round. The next they knew it was off the dolphin and on the other side of it. A green foreleg shot into sight to slap the dolphin's back. Obedient to it the mount submerged. The odd pair could just be seen making a quick half circle and then it disappeared behind the reefs. The whole thing had taken not more than a minute, but the lookers-on stood rooted to the spot for some time. Then hell broke loose. Some of the Indians shouted and ran about as though demented, others fell on their knees and prayed to God to spare their lives. A young Mexican, bawling with fright, took refuge high up the mainmast. The blacks crept below into the hold. There could be no question of going on with the work. It was all Pedro and Baltasar could do to restore some order. The jellyfish weighed anchor and sailed due north. Zurita's ill luck. The master of the vessel went below, to his cabin, to think things over. It's enough to drive one mad, he thought, pouring tepid water from a jug over his head. A sea monster speaking the purest Castellano. What was it? The devil's work? Hallucination? Can't happen to whole crews though. No two men even see the same dream. But we all saw the thing. That's a fact. So the sea devil does exist after all, however impossible it may sound. Zurita poured more water over his head and leaned out of the porthole for some fresh air. Sea devil, or not, he thought on, calming a bit, the monster appears to possess intelligence and an excellent command of Spanish. You should be able to talk to it. Suppose yes, why not? Suppose I catch it and make it dive for pearls. Why, a creature like that would be worth a whole shipful of divers. I'd be simply minting money. Every diver must have his fourth of the catch, but this thing here'd only cost me its keep. That'd mean thousands, millions of pesos rolling in. Zurita glowed with his vision of wealth. Not that it was the first time he had had it. Time and again he had dreamt of finding new, still untapped, pearling grounds. The Persian Gulf, the western coast of Ceylon, the Red Sea and the coasts of Australia were far too distant for him, and pretty well fished clean at that. Even the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of California and the coast of Venezuela, where the best American pearls were found, were too remote for his ancient schooner. He'd need more divers too. And Zurita had no money for that. So he kept in home waters. But now it was different. Now he could make his pile once he had the sea devil in his hands. He'd be the richest man in Argentina, perhaps in both Americas. Money would pave his way to power. His name would sweep the world. But he had to play his hand careful like and first see to it that the crew didn't talk. Zurita went on deck and had the whole crew down to the cook called up. You all know, he told them, what happened to those who had been spreading rumors about the sea devil. If you don't, they're still in jail. Let me give you a word of warning. This is it. Any one of you caught speaking of having seen the sea devil will be clapped in jail to feed vermin. Got that? So keep it under your hats unless you want to get into trouble. Nobody'd believe them anyway, not a fairy tale like that, Zurita thought, and, telling Baltasar to follow him, went below. Baltasar listened to Zarida's plan in silence. "Sounds good," he said after a moment's thought. "The creature's worth 100 divers. A devil? At your beck and call, not bad, But you've got to catch it first." "A sturdy net'll take care of that," said Zarida. "He'll rip a net open as easily as he ripped that shark's belly. We can order a wire net. Who's going to do the catching?" "Not our divers. There's not one in the whole lot of 'em won't turn yellow at the mere name of it. They wouldn't dream of giving a hand, not for all the riches in the world." "What about you, Baltasar?" The Indian shrugged his shoulders. "I've never hunted a sea devil. I expect it'll be no easy thing stalking him, seeing as you'll want him alive." "You're not afraid, are you, Baltasar? What do you make of this sea devil, anyway? What can I make of a jaguar that takes to the air or a shark that climbs the trees? A beast you don't know is terrifying. But I like my game terrifying. I'll make it worth your while." Zarida placed an assuring hand on Baltasar's arm. "The fewer people in on it, the better," he went on elaborating his plan. "You speak to the Araucanians we have on board. They've got more guts between them than the rest. Pick half a dozen from them, no more. If ours hold back, look about for others on shore. The devil seems to be keeping close inshore. We'll try and locate his lair first. Then we'll know where to shoot our net." They wasted no time. Zarida had a wire bag net that looked like a big barrel with the bottom open, made to order. Inside it he spread ordinary nets, in a way calculated to enmesh the devil. The divers were paid off. Baltasar had only managed to enlist 2 Araucanians from the crew. Another 3 he had signed on in Buenos Aires. It was decided to start the devil hunt in the bay where they had first seen it. The schooner dropped anchor a few miles off the bay so as not to arouse the devil's suspicions. While Zarida's party occupied themselves with occasional fishing to justify their hanging around, they took turns in watching the waters of the bay from the shelter of some rocks on the shore. A second week was running out, but there was still no sign of the devil. Baltasar had struck up acquaintance with some Indians from a farming village nearby. He would sell them the daily catch at half price and then stay behind for a chat, cleverly bringing up the subject of the sea devil. Soon the old Indian knew that they had been right in choosing the spot. Indeed, many villagers had heard the horn and seen the footprints on the beach. They said that the heels looked quite human, but the toes were much too long. Sometimes they would find an imprint of the devil's back on the beach where he had lain. The devil was not known to have done anybody any harm, so the villagers had long ceased to mind the traces he left behind. Besides, none of them had actually seen him. For 2 weeks the jellyfish had kept near the bay, going on with the make-believe fishing. For 2 weeks Zarida, Baltasar and the hired Indians had scanned the bay, but still no sea devil would show up. Zarida fretted and raged. He was as stingy as he was impatient. Every day cost money, and that devil had kept them cooling their heels there many days now. Pedro was assailed by doubts. Suppose the creature was really a devil? Then no nets would catch him. Neither did superstitious Zarida particularly like the idea of meddling with one. Of course he could call a priest on board to bless the undertaking, but that would involve additional expense. And then, again, the creature might be some first-rate swimmer disguised as a devil, to put fear into people for the sheer fun of it. There was the dolphin, of course. But that could have been tamed and trained like any other animal. Wouldn't it be better to drop the whole thing, he wondered. Zarida promised a reward to the first man to spot the devil, and, tormented with doubts, decided to wait a few days longer. To his immense joy, the third week brought signs of the devil's renewed activity. One evening Baltasar tied up his boat, laden with that day's catch to be sold in the morning, and went to a nearby farm to visit an Indian friend. On his return he found the boat empty. Baltasar was convinced that it was the devil's handiwork, though he couldn't stop marveling at the amount of fish the devil had put away. Later that evening the Indian on duty reported having heard the sound of a horn coming from the south. 2 days later, early in the morning, the youngest Araucanian finally spotted the devil. He came in from sea in the dolphin's company, not riding it this time but swimming alongside, grasping with one hand a broad leather collar round the dolphin's neck. In the bay the devil took the collar off the dolphin, patted it on the back, swam to the foot of a sheer cliff that jutted high on the shore, and was seen no more. On hearing the Indians' report, Zarita promised not to forget about the reward and said, "The devil isn't likely to stir from his den today. That gives us a chance to have a look at the seabed. Now, then, who's willing?" But that was a risk nobody was eager to take. Then Baltasar stepped forward. "I'm willing," was all he said. Baltasar wasn't one to go back on his word. Leaving a watchman on board, they went ashore and to the steep cliff. Baltasar wound the end of a diving cord round his middle, took a knife, seized a stone between his knees and went down. The Araucanians waited in tense silence for his appearance, peering into the water, murky blue where the cliff cast a deep shadow. A slow minute went by. At last there was a tug at the cord. When Baltasar had been helped ashore, it was some time before he could say, panting, "There's a narrow passage down there, leads into a cave as dark as a shark's belly. And no other place for the devil to be gone to, just a sheer wall of rock all round." "Splendid," exclaimed Zarita. "The darker, the better. We only have to cast the net and wait for the blighter to walk in." Dusk was falling on the bay when the Indians lowered the wire net into the water across the mouth of the cave and secured the sturdy end ropes to rocks on shore. Then Baltasar tied a number of small bells to the ropes for early warning. That done, Zarita, Baltasar and the 5 Araucanians settled down on the sand to await developments. Nobody had been left on board the schooner this time. All hands were Narrated. The night darkened swiftly. Presently the moon appeared and silvered the surface of the ocean. The hush of night enveloped the beach. The little party sat on in tense silence. Any minute now they might see that strange creature that had been striking terror into the fishermen and pearl divers. The night dragged on. People were drowsing. All of a sudden the bells rang. The men sprang up, ran for the end ropes and heaved. The net felt heavy. The ropes tautened. Something seemed to be struggling in the net. At last the net came up and the pale moonlight revealed in it the body of a half-man, half-beast writhing and struggling to get free. The enormous eyes and silvery scales glistened, moonlit. The devil made desperate attempts to free his right hand, caught in the wire meshes. Finally he succeeded, unsheathed the knife that hung on a narrow leather belt at his side and started hacking at the net. "No, you don't, not a wire net," Baltasar muttered under his breath. But to his surprise the devil's knife was whetted to the task. As the divers heaved at the net for all they were worth to get it on shore, the devil was deftly widening the gash he had already made. "Heave ho, my hearties," Baltasar shouted urgently. But at the very moment when their quarry seemed as good as in their hands, the devil dropped through the gash into the water, sending up a cascade of sparkling spray, and was gone. The men stopped heaving in desperation. "That's some knife-cutting wire as you'd cut a loaf of fresh bread," Baltasar said admiringly. "The underwater blacksmiths must be a darned sight better than ours." Staring into the water, Zarita had the air of a man who had lost all his fortune at one stroke. Then he raised his head, tugged at his bristly mustache and stamped his foot. "But no, damn you, this isn't the end," he exclaimed. "I won't give up if I have to starve you in your bleeding cave. I'll spare no money, I'll hire divers, I'll have nets and traps put everywhere, but I'll get you." Whatever Zarita was lacking in, it was certainly not purpose and courage. This he had got with the hot blood of Spanish conquistadors that ran in his veins. And then he thought the thing was worth a fight, all the more so considering the devil was not half as formidable as he had feared. A creature that could be made to tap the riches of the world for him would repay itself many times over. Zarita was going to have it, be it even guarded by Neptune himself. Dr. Salvatore. Nor did Zarita go back on his word. He had had the mouth of the cave and the waters nearby crossed and recrossed with barbed wire and sturdy nets with ingenious traps guarding the few free passages left. But there was only fish to reward him for his pains. The sea devil had not shown up once. In fact, he seemed to have disappeared altogether. His dolphin friend put in a daily appearance in the bay, snorting and gamboling in the waters, apparently eager for an outing. But all in vain. Presently the dolphin would give a final snort and head for the open sea. Then the weather changed for the worse. The easterner lashed up a big swell. Sand whipped from the seabed made the water so opaque that nothing could be seen beneath the foamy crests. Zarita could spend hours on the shore, watching one huge white-headed breaker after another pound the beach. Broken, they hissed their way through the sand, rolling over pebbles and oyster shells, onto his very feet. This can't go on, Zarita said to himself one day. Something must be done about it. The creature's got his den at the bottom of the sea and he won't stir from it. Very well, so he who wants to catch him must pay him a visit. Plain as the nose on your face. And turning to Baltasar, who was making another trap for the devil, he said, "Go straightway to Buenos Aires and get 2 diving outfits with oxygen sets. Ordinary ones won't do. The devil's sure to cut the breathing tubes. Besides, we might have to make quite a trip underwater. And mind you don't forget electric torches as well." "Thinking of giving the devil a look up?" asked Baltasar. "In your company, old cock." "Yes." Baltasar nodded and set off on his errand. When he returned, he showed Zarita besides 2 diving suits and torches 2 long elaborately curved bronze knives. "They don't make their kind nowadays," he said. "These are ancient knives my forefathers used to slit open the bellies of your forefathers with, if you don't mind my saying so." Zarita didn't care for the history part of it, but he liked the knives. Early at dawn the next day, despite a choppy sea, Zarita and Baltasar got into their diving suits and went down. It cost them considerable effort to find a way through their own nets to the mouth of the cave. Complete darkness met them. They unsheathed their knives and switched on their torches. Small fish darted away, scared by the sudden glare, then came back, swarming, mosquito-like, in the 2 bluish beams. Zarita shooed them away. Their silvery scales were fairly blinding him. The divers found themselves in a biggish cave, about 12 feet high and 20 feet wide. It was empty, except for the fish apparently sheltering there from the storm or bigger fish. Treading cautiously, they went deeper into the cave. It gradually narrowed. Suddenly Zarita stopped dead. The beam of his torch had picked out from the darkness a stout iron grill blocking their way. Zarita could not believe his own eyes. He gripped at the iron bars in an attempt to pull the grill open. It didn't give. After a closer look, Zarita realized that it was securely embedded in the hewn stone walls of the cave and had a built-in lock. They were faced with still another riddle. The sea devil had apparently even greater intelligence than they had ever credited him with. He knew how to forge an iron grill to bar the way to his underwater den. But that was utterly impossible. He couldn't have forged it actually under the water, could he? That meant he didn't live underwater at all, or at least that he went ashore for long stretches of time. Zarita felt his blood throb in his temples as though he had used up his store of oxygen in those few minutes underwater. He motioned to Baltasar and they went out of the cave and came up. The Araucanians who had been on tenterhooks waiting for them were very glad to see them back. "What do you make of it, Baltasar?" said Zarita after he had taken off his helmet and recovered his breath. The Araucanian shrugged his shoulders. "We'll be ages waiting for him to come out, unless, of course, we dynamite the grill. We can't starve him out. All he needs is fish and there's plenty of that." "Do you think, Baltasar, there might be another way out of the cave inland, I mean?" Baltasar hadn't thought of that. "It's an idea though. Why didn't we have a look round first?" said Zarita. So he started on a new search. On shore Zarita came across a high solid white stone wall and followed it round. It completely encircled a piece of land, no less than 25 acres. There was only one gate, made of solid steel plates. In one corner of it there was a small steel door with a spy hole shut from inside. A regular fortress, thought Zarita. Very fishy. The farmers round here don't normally build high walls. And not a chink anywhere to have a peep through. There was not a sign of another habitation in the immediate neighborhood, just bald gray rocks, with an occasional patch of thorny bush and cactus, all the way down to the bay. Zarita's curiosity was roused. For 2 days he haunted the rocks round the wall, keeping a specially sharp eye on the steel gate. But nobody went in or out, nor did a single sound come from within. One evening, on board the Jellyfish, Zarita sought out Baltasar. "Any idea who lives in that fortress above the bay?" he asked. "Salvatore, so the Indian farm laborers tell me." "And who's he?" "God." The Spaniard's bushy black eyebrows invaded his forehead. "Having your joke, eh?" A faint smile touched the Indian's lips. "I'm telling you what I've been told. Many Indians call Salvatore a god and their savior. What does he save them from? Death. He's all-powerful, they say. He can work miracles. He holds life and death in the hollow of his hand, they say. He makes new, sound legs for the lame, keen eyes for the blind. He can even breathe life into the dead. Caramba, muttered Zarita, as he flicked up smartly his bushy mustache. There's a sea devil down the bay, and a god up it. I wonder if they're partners. If you take my advice, we'll clear out of here, and mighty quick, before our brains curdle with all these miracles. Have you seen anyone who was treated by Salvatore? I have. I was shown a man who had been carried to Salvatore with a broken leg. He was running about like a Mustang. Then I saw an Indian whom Salvatore had brought back to life. The whole village say that he was stone dead with a split skull. Salvatore put him on his feet again. He came back, full of life and laughter. Got married to a nice girl too. And then all those children. So Salvatore does receive patients? Indians. They flocked to him from everywhere, from as far away as Tierra del Fuego and the Amazon. Not satisfied with this information, Zarita went up to Buenos Aires. There too he learned that Salvatore treated only Indians, with whom he enjoyed the fame of a miracle worker. Medical men told Zarita that Salvatore was an exceptionally gifted surgeon, indeed a man of genius, but very eccentric, as is often the case with men of his caliber. His name was well known in medical circles on both sides of the Atlantic. In America he was famed for his bold, imaginative surgery. When surgeons gave up a case as hopeless, Salvatore was asked to step in. He never refused. During the Great War he was on the French front, where he operated almost exclusively on the brain. Thousands of men owed him their lives. After the armistice he went back home. His practice and real estate operations landed in his lap quite a fortune. He threw up his practice, bought some land near Buenos Aires, had a high wall built round it, another of his eccentricities, and settled down there. He was known to have taken up research. Now he only treated Indians, who called him God descended on earth. Finally Zarita found out that before the war, right where his present vast holding lay, Salvatore had had a house with an orchard also walled in on all sides. When Salvatore had been away in France, the house had been closely guarded by a Negro and a pack of ferocious bloodhounds. Of late Salvatore had lived a still more cloistered life. He wouldn't receive even his old university colleagues. Having gleaned all this information, Zarita decided to fake illness so as to get inside the grounds. Once again he was in front of the stout steel gate guarding Salvatore's property. He rapped on the gate. Nobody answered. He kept rapping on it for some time and still there was not a stir inside. His blood up, Zarita picked up a stone and started battering the gate, raising a din fit to wake the dead. Dogs barked somewhere well inside, and at last the spy hole was slid open. "What do you want?" a voice asked in broken Spanish. "A sick man to see the doctor. Hurry up now, open the door." "Sick men do not knock in this way," came the placid rejoinder, and an eye peeped through at Zarita. "Doctor's not receiving. He can't refuse help to a sick man," insisted Zarita. The spy hole shut. The footsteps died away. Only the dogs kept up their furious barking. Venting some of his anger in choice invective, the Spaniard set out for the schooner. Should he lodge a complaint against Salvatore in Buenos Aires? He asked himself once he was aboard. But what was the use? Zarita shook in futile rage. His bushy black mustache was in real danger now, as he kept tugging at it in his agitation, making it fall like a barometer showing the doldrums. Little by little, however, he quieted down and set to thinking what he should do next. As he went on thinking, his sunburnt fingers would travel up more and more often to give a flip to his drooping mustache. The barometer was rising. At last he emerged on deck, and to everybody's surprise, ordered the crew to weigh anchor. The jellyfish stood for Buenos Aires. And about time too, Baltasar commented. So much time and effort wasted. A curse on that devil, with a god for a crony.